So I only have one slide. Maybe not, but so I'm always looking for kind of an easier way to do things. So for this talk, I didn't really know what to say, so I posted a question on FriendFeed and just asked people what I should talk about. And I didn't really have time to read the responses, but I kind of skimmed over them, and someone said something about how you deal with user feedback or whatever, and so it got me thinking about this word listening, which actually I've been thinking about just in a few different contexts, maybe in the last month or so. So I actually have a second slide. So this is really common advice. People tell you to listen to your users, and I wrote something like this on my blog. I don't know, a couple months ago or something like that. And a few people responded with this quote from supposedly from Henry Ford. I couldn't tell, I couldn't find it on Wikipedia, so I don't know if it's true. But it's a really great quote because some people sort of interpret this maybe too literally, or they interpret it differently than I do. So somehow people get the idea that listening to users means doing exactly what they tell you, exactly what they ask for. Like, someone says, I want a faster horse, you go out and try to build a faster horse. And I think that's often a mistake. So there's, I think, maybe a technique to what listening means to me at least, which is that it's actually sort of a process. Like, listening just means like you let the words come at you and you try to decode what they're telling you and interpret it and actually understand why they're saying the things that they're saying, but not necessarily take what's right on the surface. Sometimes the true message is kind of buried a little bit. So as an example, someone says, I need a faster horse. They're offering you a solution, which is a faster horse, but really just listen to the problem. Their problem is that the horse is too slow. So the problem part of what they're telling you is correct, but they probably gave it like 3 seconds of thought, and they didn't really come up with the best solution, which was a faster horse. And so I have, for some reason, there's a few instances of this that have really stuck in my mind. Like early on at Gmail development at Google, there was this one time where I started getting all of these really strange feature requests. And I didn't really understand why. People were saying, I need to be able to respond to messages directly from in the inbox. And so I just sort of started asking people, why do you want this weird feature? And it turned out that we just let the server get really slow. And what they were really saying is, Gmail is too slow. And, we fixed the performance, and then they stopped asking for the feature. And so it was to me, a really good example of where the message was really pretty well buried beneath the surface. So I continuing the listening theme, everyone gets up here and kind of gives their little spiel about the right way to do everything. And that makes me nervous because I don't really know what the right way to do things is. And I don't want to be responsible for you doing the wrong thing. So I've tried in the past to explain that you shouldn't just follow people's advice kind of blindly because they might be wrong. And unfortunately, that got interpreted as, at least a few times, that you should ignore advice, which is not at all what I meant. So last year I came up with this slide that I think people actually figured out, which is just that you need to understand advice. We all really only know our own lives, and even then only barely. And so for me to tell you what you should do is kind of stupid because your situation is completely different from mine. I've came from a different place. It's a different time. I'm probably a different age. And again, there's some kind of funny stories that come to mind. One of Paul Graham's essays, he talks about when they were starting BioWeb, they had some advisor who told them that the key to success in software was that you had to put it in cardboard boxes and sell it at the computer store. And so they somehow made cardboard boxes and put BioWeb in it, even though it was a website. And and got it on the shelf at some computer store and sold like 2 copies of it. And the guy had been very successful. He was just applying the same thing he had learned, but in fact he was overgeneralizing the lesson. Like cardboard boxes worked great for him, but ViaWeb was a different product, and the world had changed as well, and so there was some mismatch there. So once again, in the spirit of reusing slides, same thing for advice. Like you just need to kind of listen to what people are saying. There's a lot to be learned from what they're telling you, but you can't just accept what's right on the surface. You have to kind of understand the context and try to understand why people think that something is a good idea. Like, why does this guy think that cardboard boxes of software is a good idea? And how their situation is similar or different from yours. So, I mean, just sort of as a disclaimer, like my experiences with a lot of this kind of consumer web software, like Gmail or FriendFeed, and most of my lessons are from that. And so the advice I'm giving you, like if you're building, enterprise software to compete with Oracle or something, like I'm probably giving you terrible advice, because, maybe you should ignore the users if you're doing that, because they're like powerless anyway. You should hire a slick sales staff or something. I don't really know. So really, every situation is different, and you have to figure out how to make the most of yours. Like everyone has kind of a unique set of resources and talents and abilities and insight. And if you try to play someone else's hand, you're probably going to lose. So another kind of advice-related thing while I'm on the topic is to be very careful to watch out for advice that kind of limits these limiting beliefs. And so, for example, if someone says that's impossible, again, there's like the interpretation and understanding step. Understand it as, according to my limited experience and very narrow understanding of reality, that's very unlikely. It's probably like a really hard learned lesson for them, but things have changed, and maybe they just did it wrong. Listening to what is. So sometimes people talk about reality, and I guess that's what I mean by what is, but usually when they say reality, they're trying to like crush your dreams or something. So it's a dangerous word. But in the spirit of kind of the lazy way of doing everything, I think like a lot of invention is just, if you stop and pay really close attention to what's going on in the world, you can just kind of like rip off little things all over the place. And you just notice like what does, how do things happen in nature? And there's all these like little clues everywhere about, maybe there's another product that it's a really bad product, but there's just one thing about it that's really cool. There's one thing you really like, and maybe if you really just draw out that one feature and really emphasize it, you can make something cool. Again, I'm looking for like a good metaphor, and the best I've come up with is like tuning into a signal on a radio. But we don't really do that anymore, so I don't know if that's a good metaphor. But I don't know if you use the dial, you kind of turn it just right, and there's kind of a weak and distant signal, but you kind of just work at it, and you can get the signal eventually. This kind of goes back, I think someone said earlier, instead of like going out and looking for solutions, go out and you look at problems and just notice problems that are around you, and then you can come up with solutions. And there's plenty of problems in the world. Listening for success. So success often starts out very small and subtle. A lot of times people launch a product and they think that like the next day they're going to be Google or whatever. They're going to be some huge success and everyone's going to say how great they are. But most products, like, they launch and no one uses it, no one cares. And it's just like it's just silence. So I think like the thing to do there is to try to find at least one person who cares, one person who's enthusiastic about what you're building. Like, just look for, you don't need like 1 million happy users. You just need like one person who's like really enthusiastic and keeps sending you email. And you kind of listen to that person and you follow them and you try to figure out if there's more people like that person. And again, it's almost like you're kind of tuning into that distant signal slowly. So, and this is, again, one of the advantages of launching your product quickly instead of trying to think that you're going to make it perfect, which is really sort of arrogant. Maybe you can find at least one person who likes what you're doing. And if you can't, maybe you're doing the wrong thing. You should find a new product. One of the best things we ever did on Gmail, actually, was we got this challenge. And unfortunately, it's been long enough ago, I can't remember who came up with the idea. I actually think it was Eric Schmidt, which is that we should get 100 happy users inside of Google before launching. And I was like, oh, that's easy. Google has like thousands of employees or something. But it turns out happiness is a really high bar. And to get people to say that they're happy was actually sort of challenging. We literally did it one user at a time. We would go to people and be like, okay, what's it going to take to make you happy? And in some cases, they would ask for something really hard, and we'd be like, okay, well, you're not going to be happy with Gmail. Like, possibly ever. But other people, it turned out there would be like something really small we could do, and then they would be happy. And so we would do the really easy things until we finally got 100 people who were happy. And 100 doesn't sound like a lot, but it turns out people are pretty similar to each other. So if you can make 100 people happy, usually you can make more. Listening to yourself. So again, if it's back in the theme of instead of like going out searching for things, if you just kind of stop and pay attention to what's going on, sometimes you notice something interesting, what's going on just inside your own body or mind. And this is useful, I think, for everything. It's certainly useful for improving usability. If you start to notice every time you kind of have to wait for something, or every time you get even slightly confused or aggravated with the product, or just any small annoyance, to some extent you have to actually make yourself slightly less happy to do this, because you have to be irritated by like everything that's wrong with everything. And you don't need to have solutions, you just need to notice the problems. It's also great for product ideas. If you're like irritated that I don't know, I mean, in my case, like with Gmail or something like that, I could never find any of my emails, and like it was all really confusing for me. And so, most of the things we put into Gmail were just like, I was just annoyed with something, and we'd try to think of a solution for it. And I think the same principle applies to pretty much everything else: jobs, teams, projects, source code. Before Google, I worked at Intel, and I don't know if you know anything about Intel. It's basically like seas of gray cubicles, and it's like it's a picture of the corporate world or whatever. And every day I would go into work, and I would just feel like really drained. Like I was like, oh, I don't really feel like working today. And I don't know, I started to think maybe engineering isn't really right for me. Maybe this is the wrong job. Like, I just don't know what it is, but I don't know, whatever. And I eventually quit just because I was sort of interested in startups more than anything. Like, I don't know, it just seemed more exciting. And I joined Google, which at the time was over in Palo Alto, and 20-ish people, and just I just noticed almost immediately, like I would go into work and it was exciting. And there was like just this buzz of energy, and people having fun and actually like enjoying life, and like being glad that they were there. And maybe on the weekend or whatever, I'd be thinking, oh, I can't wait to get back to work on Monday. I've got like this really cool idea I want to do, or something like that. And just that internal feeling of excitement and energy, I think, is a really good signal. And a few years ago, I went into Google, and I noticed that I felt kind of drained. I just didn't feel like doing anything. And in fact, like for a few months, I did basically nothing. So I decided it was time to quit. And now I go to work and I have fun. So just one more of these things. Listening to opportunity. So there's this really good story that just popped into my head from, actually it came from Jessica's book though. It's a quote from Steve Wozniak, his interview. And it's actually free on the web. You should go read his interview. It's really interesting. But it's the story of the formation of Apple. And it turns out he was still working at Hewlett-Packard when they were doing all this. And the guy, I think, who was going to give him money or something, said that he was going to have to quit his job so that they could form Apple. And Steve Wozniak said, I mean, this is just part of the dialogue. He's like, I've decided not to do it, etc. Steve Jobs was apparently unhappy with that answer, that Wozniak was going to stay at HP. And so he actually ended up lining up all of Steve Wozniak's friends and family and like having them all contact him and tell him that he like had to quit his job. And he was just relentless, which you can imagine. I mean, he probably gives a really good hard sell. And so eventually they managed to convince him to quit his job at HP and found Apple. And so I just sort of imagine what would have been different, if Woz had stayed at HP and just said like, no, maybe the time's not right for me. I'd like to work at HP a few more years, get some experience here. It's not a bad job. Apple wouldn't exist. Wozniak would just be another obscure HP engineer that probably hasn't made any huge contributions and probably got laid off a few years ago when HP was doing all of their stuff. And it's kind of tragic to think about because he's such a brilliant and talented engineer that nearly happened. And the thing I realize is just that there's probably like thousands of Wozniaks out there working at HP or Intel or any other of these big companies. Who are really nowhere near reaching their potential because they're just spending their days like drained and kind of bored, and then they go home and watch TV, and they never do anything significant just because there's like the system is just wrong for them. And I mean, obviously the question is like, are you one of those people? And speaking of that, if you are one of those brilliant engineers. So I actually haven't talked about FriendFeed as much as I would like on my blog, just because every time I started to write something, it sounded really stupid and cliche because everyone says like we're building something different and whatever, but then they go flip it for $20 million or something, and you're like, well, you weren't really doing something different, were you? But we really are doing things differently, and I'm trying to like figure out some way to make that sort of provably true. And so once I figure it out, I'll write more about it. But for now, you have to just take my word for it. And if you're a brilliant engineer who gets things done, it's it's basically the best opportunity you have right now. And I'm really completely unbiased in that when I say that it's for your own good. So send us your resume. So there is just one more, which is if you have any questions for me.
So you talked a lot about listening to your users and kind of getting their feedback on, kind of figure out what features they want to get from your products. Kind of as startups, one limitation is limited resources. And how do you kind of balance and prioritize the features and feedback that users get and how to improve your product?
I usually do some combination of whatever is easiest. Like if it doesn't take much effort, I'll do it. Or if it's something I want. So basically, just whatever is some combination of laziness and selfishness.
So is that basically listening to yourself more than
yeah, pretty much.
Kind of the union of the two?
In particular, I mean, I do try to think about if my needs or if the needs of that user is sort of special case to them, or if it's something that might apply to a lot more people. Because a lot of times, and the risk with adding features is that you put in something that maybe only is important for 1% of people, But you're like hurting the other 99% of people because the feature may not be useful for them, or it's going to make the interface more complicated. It's going to make the code harder to handle and whatever. And so you're hurting 99% of people just to help this 1% of people. And I think that's probably like usually a mistake unless that 1% of people is really important.
Hey there. I thought your advice about advice was both a little bit recursive and very interesting. And it also has this interesting cultural component. My parents both grew up in India in a culture that really respects their elders. And so they've gotten to a point where they're the matriarch and the patriarch of the family, and they feel it's their responsibility to give advice to everybody. So my dad, who, until recently was still putting floppies in drives backwards, feels like he's in a position to tell me how to start up a company and how to charge for stuff and how to think about it. And I know there's a lot of people here that come from those cultures, and I would just say sometimes you sort of have to listen to people who are trying to tell you advice because it's what they believe their role is in life, and respectfully ignore it.
Yeah, probably. But I can't disagree. I don't know.
Okay, I have a couple questions. One, when Gmail first started, I've seen a couple models out when a new service launches. And what are your thoughts on invites as opposed to just launching and letting people kind of find it and marketing it on the web? And two, what are your thoughts on, there's so much stuff out there, the YouTubes, all these different services, and FriendFeed is obviously kind of like an aggregator with value added on top of that. What's your view on creating kind of like a new type of media service as opposed to kind of aggregating and mashing up what's already out there and adding value to it?
I forgot the first question already.
The first question was invites. Invites.
Oh yeah, invites are good if you want to keep users away, for the most part. Which I mean, like for Gmail, we didn't want like too many users because we didn't really think we were ready for a variety of reasons. Like, we just wanted to get more users. Like, there's some sustainable rate at which you can grow without bad things happening. And so, because of the nature of things, we wanted to kind of control that rate. And actually, we did the same thing with FriendFeed just because like we weren't really sure if the product was ready just yet.
Is it any type of a marketing type spin? I mean,
yeah,
I noticed a lot of blogs.
In hindsight, like a lot of people think it's some brilliant marketing maneuver, but it could be. I don't know. I wouldn't assume that it is, but it might be. I don't know.
And then, because I know it gives blogs the opportunity to give, invites to their...
Yeah, I don't know. It might work. I can't tell. I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, certainly with Gmail, it was fun to see people like auctioning them off on eBay for a bunch of money and stuff. But like, I have no idea like if we had done things differently, if we'd be more or less successful. Like I think there's unfortunately like in this startup and probably all other worlds, like this cargo cult tendency where people see like something they see something successful and they just sort of like imitate the superficial attributes of it. Like they say, oh, that site has like a rounded logo. That must be the key to success. Or like people did this with Delicious, where like Delicious had this ridiculous URL that had dots in it, and like other people copied it, even though it was probably not even a good idea.
Dropping vowels.
Yeah, I mean, like there is some value in that just because it's easier to find the domains or something like that. But sometimes, and I think like invites might be a little case of this, where there were some successful products that had invites, and so people thought, well, it must be the invites that made them successful, but it might just be coincidence. I don't know.
You don't have to answer the second one if you don't want to. It was aggregates versus creating your own type of service.
Oh yeah, I don't really see FriendFeed as an aggregate. It performs aggregation in the same sense that like an email client aggregates SMTP traffic. So it's a different experience. I mean, it's a different product, and it's just that the ability to import feeds makes it a lot more useful than if it didn't do that. Just as an email client that couldn't receive email wouldn't be as useful.
Point taken.
So when you talk about users driving features and that sort of thing, and evaluating putting in a feature that 1% would like and 99% might not like, have you ever found yourself in a position either with Gmail or with FriendFeed that you actually put something in that you later took out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Probably most of the things I put into Gmail, I never made it. I have lots of ideas, and they aren't all good, it turns out. So I guess I'm a big believer in trying things out, because I also think it's really hard to predict in advance, because a lot of the things that seemed like my worst ideas turned out to be good after all. And so we had a lot of features in Gmail that, for a variety of reasons, never made the cut. With FriendFeed, there have been a few small things, but for the most part, they're kind of tuning. There was one feature that was only live for about an hour, and everyone hated it so much I deleted it.
Well, yeah, that's my question. With Gmail as well, did things actually get out the door and in front of the public, and then you found out later that...
Well, I mean, there was a long period of development on Gmail where it was inside of Google, which was sort of like a kind of restricted public. But if you're a startup that no one's ever heard of, you're probably going to have a similar sized audience as someone working inside of Google or something, just because most people have never heard of you. Right?
Yep. You have any? Go ahead.
Last question.
Okay, so now with FriendFeed, you're thinking about hiring. What's that inflection point where you actually now want to bring in other people on your team? Take the leap with trust to bring in hopefully other talent. So.
Wow. You're saying, when do you decide to hire? Well, I mean, again, it's a combination of a lot of factors, like when can you hire? Yeah, right? I mean, if you're a startup that doesn't have any money, hiring might be harder to do. But for us, we always want to be in a position where it also is just how much can the business support in terms of we don't ever want to run out of money or anything like that. So we're not going to grow super big unless we have a whole bunch of money coming in to support that, just because I don't want that kind of business where it's going to fall apart. But I mean, more people if they're really good people, I've found I've never really had problem figuring out what to do with more really great people, because if they're really great, they usually can kind of just take care of themselves. And they're one of the things we're really looking for is not just people who are technically clever, but that they kind of have reasonable judgment, so that we don't really have to pay much attention to them, and they can just kind of do stuff on their own, and it'll just happen to be the right thing. And we'll talk about it occasionally. So.
Thank you.
Right.